Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On our deal with.
Ooh, yeah. Nah, nah, nah.
Suddenly there came a sound from heaven, as of a rushing mighty wind, like the rushing of a mighty wind, like the rushing of a mighty wind. Come and fill our hearts again, like the rushing of a mighty wind.
Yeah, blessings. Once again, you know the routine. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. All of that helps. So you don't know. Without any further ado, let's get started.
This is Frederick Douglass. All this native land talk that we're African is nonsense. Frederick Douglass said anybody saying we're African is nonsense. So when Kwame brings up Supreme Court Justice, Frederick Douglass said that white dude is crazy. That's nonsense. We're not African. Then he goes on to say the native land of the American Negro is America. His bones, his muscles, his ligaments are all American, right? All American. His ancestors for 270 years have lived and labored and died on American soil, and millions of his progeny have inherited Caucasian blood. Then he goes on to say, it is competent, therefore, to ask, in view of this admixture, as well as the view of other facts, where the people of this mixed race, he called us mixed race. He says we're black and white. We're black and white. But notice he said that, he said, look at all this. I want to focus on this.
Listen, he said you're black?
Look at, no, we're a mixture of black and white.
He said you're black?
He said you're black?
No, listen.
He said you're black?
No, listen. A mixture of black. Yeah. No, hang on.
I don't know if y'all noticed, but in USA Doc, he said that Frederick Douglass said for 270 years, black people have lived in America. So he says they've only lived here for 270 years. I don't know why USA Docs just keeps looking past those minor details. And you know, Kwame was trying to point it out to him, but he's blind, man. Homeboy is blind. And yeah, I can't think of any other word to describe USA Docs other than he's pretty blind. But I'm gonna let this play a little bit more.
What did Frederick Douglass just say?
Yeah, right here. We're a mixture of black and white.
He said you arrived here 270 years.
No, he didn't. He says no, Kwame, you can't read. No, Kwame, you Jamaicans are so thirsty. You guys make up shit. He said his ancestors for 270 years have what? Lived, labored, and died on American soil. He never said we came from Africa. He never. Yeah, no, that's when slavery started by the white man. No, bro.
He says for 270 years, his ancestors for 270 years have lived here for 270 years. It's really USA Docs that can't read. And no matter how much Kwame is pointing this out to this man, he's just ignoring it. His ancestors for 270, this is Frederick Douglass saying this. So all this talk about Frederick Douglass saying that they're not African is ridiculous. That's what I want to talk about today. Did Frederick Douglass refer to himself and others as Africans? That's what we want to talk about today. And this, his ancestors for 270 years lived, labored, and died on American soil. They lived on American soil for 270 years. That's plain enough. That should be clear enough that y'all haven't always been here. out of Frederick Douglass's mouth himself.
That's when slavery started by the white man. He never said we came from Africa. Kwame, he said any talk of us being African is nonsense. It's right there. He literally says all this native land talk about us being Africa is nonsense. He goes, our native land is America, right? He says America.
Hold on. USA docs. By description, are you black or are you copper? Because the other day you were saying you weren't black, you were copper.
Oh, copper.
Now in order to agree with, so you're copper.
Yeah.
So why are you showing us Frederick Douglass saying you're black and you're not black?
No,
why are you
listen, bro, you just saw him
yesterday, you made a distinction between copper Americans and black Americans. You said you were of the copper kind, not the black. Now you're using Frederick Douglass to say you're black.
Look at your screen. What does it say?
Are you copper or are you black?
No, look at your screen. What did he say?
Or black? Are you copper or black?
Oh, I'm not black. As a descriptor, yes, but literally no. As a descriptor, yes, but actually no.
Is that how
brown.
Frederick Douglass was using it as a descriptor?
Disagree with
no. Hang on.
White and black as a descriptor.
Yeah, those are descriptors, Blow. Yeah,
okay.
He understood that. In fact, Frederick Douglass said that black was a descriptor himself because Frederick Douglass said he's mixed race. He said his father's white and his mother's black. So he's mixed race, right? So Frederick Douglass understood about
a race. It's not a descriptor, it's a race.
No, he's talking about a descriptor because he understood. He goes, I'm a mixed race. No, American Dream.
You just said he said race.
American Dream. No, American Dream. Let me prove it to you.
What is wrong with this guy?
As you see, Frederick Douglass said that we are an amalgamation of black and white. What's the white? Caucasian. We have inherited Caucasian blood. Look right here. So when I say that we have elite European admixture, that is a fact. We have inherited, he said, millions of us during slavery had already inherited Caucasian blood. And he said, once again, any talk about Africa being our native land is nonsense. We are American. Bones, muscles, ligaments. We are American as it gets. Harriet Tubman says right here. Harriet Tubman says that what? Harriet Tubman says that our native land is America. And she doubled down. Our native land is America. So any talk about us being African is crazy. They did her ancestry, right? They did her ancestry. Guess what? They found no African on her mother's side. No African. It says, because she says she took her DNA test, says she's African, and they said like experts from England, experts from the Daily Mail came to America to find her African side, and they said that her slave records ended in America in 1830, with records currently going back no further than 1830, and they said we found no African in her, no African, because we're not African, bro. We're not African.
All right, so this is the first thing I want to talk about is Frederick Douglass and whether or not Frederick Douglass saw himself as an African or an African American. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading today just to kind of speak to USA Docs' question about whether or not Frederick Douglass considered himself to be an African or whether he thought he had African ancestry. So I went to ChatGPT. I hope USA Docs is listening. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, did Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman refer to American blacks as African? Yeah, I asked about Harriet Tubman as well because USA Docs also brought up Harriet Tubman. So I wanted to know about both of them really, whether or not they considered themselves and their people to be Africans. So ChatGPT said, great question. Frederick Douglass, it started off with Frederick Douglass. It says, Douglass usually referred to himself and other formerly enslaved people as colored people, Negroes, Black Americans, or my people. In his speeches and writings, like What to the Slave is the 4th of July and his autobiographies, He often spoke of African descent, but did not typically use the term Africans to describe Black people born in America. Instead, he emphasized their American identity while linking their oppression to slavery's African roots. He would say things like Americans of African descent. So he acknowledged the African connection, but he didn't call them simply Africans. Now, why would he do that? I think the reason he would do that is because he wanted to first identify them as Americans, because he was trying to get them to be freed. And by freeing them, they would become American citizens. So he wanted them to be American, which is why he didn't really want to refer to them as Africans. But he did acknowledge their African ancestry. That's without a doubt. That is unquestionable, that he acknowledged their African ancestry. And that's what ChatGPT says. Then it goes on to Harriet Tubman. It said Tubman left behind fewer writings and formal speeches, but from the records of her life and what others wrote about her, she usually referred to enslaved people as my people, the colored folks, or the slaves. She strongly identified with the Black community in America, but like Douglass, she didn't generally refer to them as Africans in everyday language. And then it gives a context. It says in the 19th century, calling US-born Blacks Africans was more common among white abolitionists, colonizationalists, and Pan-African advocates like Martin Delany or American Colonization Society. Black leaders like Douglass resisted this framing because it implied they were not truly American. Douglass in particular argued that Black people were entitled to full citizenship in the US and had earned America through their labor and suffering. So to answer directly, Douglass sometimes used the phrase Americans of African descent, but emphasized American. Tubman did not, as far as records show, commonly call Black Americans Africans. So Douglass referred to them as Americans of African descent, but Tubman did not. Tubman just called them her people for the most part. Then ChatGPT asked if I wanted to see direct quotes from Douglass and Tubman where they mention African or African descent. And I said, absolutely. So it says, here are some relevant direct quotes and context related to your question about whether Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman referred to Black Americans simply as Africans. Frederick Douglass, quote, I have no love for America as such. I have no patriotism. I have no country. In this strong statement, Douglass emphasized his estrangement from a country that denied him recognition and rights. Although he didn't deny his heritage, he was rejecting identifications that didn't include full citizenship and respect. In the second quote, he says, quote, I am for the immediate, unconstitutional, and universal enfranchisement of the Black man in every state in the Union. Delivered in his 1865 speech, What the Black Man Wants. This line shows that Douglass spoke of Black Americans as, quote, the Black man. USA Docs, I know you're listening. You're in the back chat, so I know you're listening. Douglass spoke of Black Americans as, quote unquote, the Black man, reflecting importance of both race and citizenship, not simply Africans. It says there's no evidence that Douglass referred to American-born Black people as Africans in his formal speeches or writings. He emphasized Black Americans' rights an identity within the US as opposed to simply their African heritage. Now, Harriet Tubman says Harriet Tubman left behind fewer published writings, and there's no documented instance of her calling Black Americans Africans. Many attributed quotes, like the famous but debunked, "I freed 1,000 slaves and could have freed 1,000 more, if only they knew they were slaves," have no verifiable source and are considered apocryphal. Even in mythology and public memory, she is never quoted referring to enslaved or freed Black Americans using the term Africans. In all reliable biographical accounts, she is described as helping African Americans, but not directly calling them Africans. So in all her biographical accounts, everyone who writes about her life, they say that she was helping African Americans. So though the authors of her biography mention the people she was saving as African Americans, but she herself did not refer to them as Africans or nor African Americans anywhere on record. So Frederick Douglass, the terminology he used was the black man, colored, my people, etc. And there's no documented use referring to them simply as Africans. Harriet Tubman, it says implicitly African Americans in third person accounts. So only third person or other people said she was helping African Americans, but she didn't use the term. And it says there's no documented use herself calling them Africans. So in conclusion, it says Frederick Douglass occasionally used phrases like Americans of African descent to highlight heritage, but he consistently emphasized Black people's American identity and fought for their rights as citizens. So Frederick Douglass seems to be, because I acknowledge my African heritage, but I'm an American. I'm not an African. I have African heritage, but I'm an American. I am not an African, but I have African heritage. And that seems to be the same way that Frederick Douglass sees himself and his people. He absolutely does not deny their African heritage. He refers to them as Americans of African heritage. But he refers to them as Americans. So Frederick Douglass, in my estimation, is more along the lines of where I'm coming from than where these FBA people are coming from. Because FBA claim they have no African heritage. So they are denying Frederick Douglass himself. Harriet Tubman, it says, based on available records, did not personally refer to Black Americans as Africans, though historians and writers may describe her activities involving African Americans. So her activities were described as involving African Americans, but she herself did not refer to them as such. I then asked ChatGPT to give a quote of Douglass using American of African descent. I wanted to see the quote itself, not just ChatGPT saying that he did it. I wanted to actually hear the quote. And it says, absolutely, here's a direct and documented instance of Frederick Douglass using the phrase Americans of African descent along with proper context. Douglass's impassioned speech included the prediction of a great future for Americans of African descent. So he said, quote, there would be a great future for Americans of African descent. And that's from an account of an 1888 speech which was given in Charleston, where Douglass celebrated the emerging prominence of Black Americans in fields like literature, science, and art, and envisioned their contributions to the nation's future. And it says this quote clearly illustrates that Douglass intentionally emphasized the American identity of Black people, while also acknowledging their African heritage, framing both as integral components of their recognition and rights in the United States. Right, so there's the quote from his 1988 speech in Charleston, where he says, a great future, there's going to be a great, where he predicted a quote, great future for Americans of African descent. The next thing I asked was which biological account refers to Tubman helping African Americans, right? Give me some quotes of these historical biographical accounts written about Harriet Tubman and her helping African Americans. And it says, good question. Let's ground Harriet Tubman's case in biographical accounts and direct quotations rather than myths. Tubman didn't leave behind extensive writings herself, so most of what we know comes from biographies and contemporaries who recorded her words. Here are the key sources where she is explicitly tied to helping African Americans. This one is Sarah H. Bradford's authorized biography. Sarah Bradford wrote 2 works based on interviews with Tubman while Tubman was alive. They are one, Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman in 1869, and Harriet, the Moses of Her People in 1886. So these are quotes from works in 1869 and in 1886. It says, in these, Bradford directly describes Tubman as working for the freedom of African Americans. The first quote, she was continually sought after and was ever ready to go wherever she was most needed among her people. That's from Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman, 1869. And the next quote, Harriet Tubman has been the means of freeing hundreds of her race and is still ready to aid in every effort for the benefit of the African race in this country. And that's from Moses of Her People in 1886. So what we have is this writer in 1886 saying that Harriet Tubman was working for the African race. This wasn't someone in the 1970s. This is in 1886. So if Harriet Tubman didn't say it herself, this lady, Sarah Bradford, did in 1886. Sarah Bradford is referring to the slaves being helped by Harriet Tubman as people of the African race. And then ChatGPT says to notice that Bradford frames Tubman's work as aiding her race or the African race in this country. The African race in this country. Meaning they didn't belong to this country. They were the African race in this country, which biographers later streamlined into African Americans. So she said the African race in this country, but later biographers changed that to African Americans. So that's the first one. Next, William Still's The Underground Railroad in 1872. It says, William Still, a free Black abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad, personally documented Tubman's rescues. It says, Harriet Tubman deserves great praise for her heroic deeds. With the utmost bravery, she has led off a large number of her fellow bondmen to freedom. She has been the deliverer of more than 300 of her people. Underground Railroad. Here Still uses her people and bondmen, but modern biographers cite this as Tubman helping African Americans escape bondage. The next one is Earl Conrad in 1943. Conrad's biography was one of the first scholarly modern accounts. And the quote is, quote, Harriet Tubman dedicated her life to the liberation of African Americans, not only through the Underground Railroad, but also as a nurse, scout, and advocate after the war. And it says this biography explicitly uses the term African Americans to describe those that Tubman served. So the summary, contemporaries like Bradford and Still used phrases like her race, her people, and the African race in this country. Later historians like Conrad and beyond consistently frame her as helping African Americans, the modern term that captures her community. So Tubman herself didn't literally say African Americans in the 19th century, but biographers and contemporaries described her in ways that clearly referred to the same group, and by the 20th century, historians applied the modern term directly. Okay? So, USA Docs, when you put up your thing, zoom in back and forth, you got to pay attention and notice a few things. Frederick Douglass said that his people have lived on this land for 270 years. That's how long he said y'all lived here. And you have to acknowledge that. You can't just go fast past that. You can't just talk fast over that and zoom away from it. You can't do that. You have to be honest to his words. You have to be honest when you're describing him. He said y'all have been here for 270 years, and he referred to you as Americans of African descent.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. When God spoke his words, they said he was deranged. Marley sung his songs, they said the same. Malcolm X and Martin Luther fought relentlessly so we could be better. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they